Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you to today's webinar discussing the Uganda Human Donation and Transplant Act of 2002. My name is Denise Wavilye, and I'm the Vice Chairperson of the Health and the Law Cluster of the Uganda Law Society. I welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining in on time. I welcome the entire legal fraternity, those that are not lawyers that are here to listen in on this important discussion. I welcome you all, and I'm so excited. I hope you are. I'm very sure we are going to enjoy our 2 hours that we're going to spend here. So there has been a wave of medical advancement that has seen the rise of human organ donation and transplanting to cure the non-communicable diseases like kidney failure, bone marrow disorders, sickle cells, among the like. But there has also been very, very many stories about illicit trade of organs. And in Uganda, we have heard about the unemployed youth who go to seek for domestic work in the Middle East, and they come back with an organ missing. And recently, we also had a story about Awan Muhammad Kabanda, who claimed that Old Kampala Hospital had harvested his kidneys. And this was a trader who had had an accident and had been hospitalized in the Old Kampala Hospital, but claimed that his kidney was taken out. Unfortunately, this was cleared by a scan and medical doctors who say that actually Kabanda was born with only one kidney. So this conversation is very important, and it's important because now Uganda joins the list of so many countries in the world that have a law, a very comprehensive law that governs human donation, human harvesting, and transplanting. The Uganda Human Donation and Transplant Bill was tabled in Parliament in 2021, and this was passed by the Parliament in December 2022, and the President of Uganda assented to it in March 2023, and it was then gazetted and it became law in June 2023. So it's a timely discussion that we're having just about a month after it was gazetted. So the act was actually set out to provide for, first of all, regulation of the removal, storage, and transplantation of human organs, tissues, and cells. And it also established the Uganda Human Donation and Transplant Council. And this council is it has so much work, by the way. If you read in the act, it has lots and lots of things to do. One of them is to provide for accreditation for the hospitals that are designated to be transplant centers. It is set out to provide for the establishment and approval of the human organ and donation banks. And among others, it's also supposed to ensure and guarantee that people are protected. Their rights to integrity are also protected, among other reasons why it was put out. But most importantly, it also makes it illegal to carry out this illicit trade on organ donation and transplant. I'm very glad that we have the panelists, or the speakers that we have today, people who have been involved in the documentation of this and in the scrutinizing of this act, and in also producing it to become law. So I want to take this opportunity to introduce to you our speakers for today. And the first one is Dr. Charles Ayume, who is a Ugandan medical doctor and a politician, and he is a member of the Parliament of Uganda representing Koboko municipality, and he's also the chairman of the Committee on Health, which scrutinized this bill, or this act that we now have. We also have Professor Frank Asimwe, who is a celebrated consultant, urologist, and surgeon, and he is also the president of the Association of Surgeons of Uganda. He's actually one of the brains behind this great act that we are going to look at today. He worked hand in hand with the members of parliament to ensure that they produce this law. Last but not least, we have Dr. Moses Mulumba, who is a lawyer with special expertise in global health and sexual reproductive health and rights. He is the founding executive director of the Center for Health, Human Rights and Development, abbreviated as CEHAD, and now he is the Director General of Afya na Haki. Thank you so much, Dr. Frank. Thank you so much, Dr. Charles and Dr. Moses Mulumba, for choosing to speak to us today about this hot topic of the Uganda human organ donation and transplant. Right away, I want to invite Dr. Moses Mulumba to take it on and open up the discussion by giving us a human rights perspective and analysis of this entire act. Was this the most pressing issue? Did we need this act? Did it take into account all the human rights perspectives? And is it even a good law? So let me welcome Dr. Mulumba to speak to us. Thank you so much. Dr. Mulumba, are you on call? Okay, please bear with us while we try to get Dr. Mulumba to unmute his microphone so he can speak to us. Okay, well, Dr. Mulumba tries to sort out his microphone. Can we please have Professor Frank speak to us? And Professor Frank is going to give us the medical perspective. Is Uganda ready for this act? Was it even an important act that we have in 2022? Dr. Frank, you are welcome. Thank you so much. Let's hear you now.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Professor.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. As a disclaimer, I must confess I shared the website to many, so there are many Frank Asimwes. I would like to propose that those who are not myself, just rename your gadgets so that I don't look like I've cloned myself or I've rigged the election by bringing in voters. So just as you are able, please just rename your gadgets with different names. Don't log off. I think some people are having trouble logging on. So don't log off, just rename your gadget. Frank Asimwe are my names. I'm a consultant urologist at the Mulago National Referral Hospital and transplant surgeon in training. I'm yet to complete my training. I'm also a professor of surgery. I chair the transplant, the organ transplant committee in Mulago, and I have been in the trenches of drafting this document, which started largely around 2014. The committee in Mulago was asked to put some few thoughts together, and we began thinking through the process. You know, what is a transplant? Who is a donor? Things I'm going to be talking about. And then later on, the Minister of Health and Cabinet passed the principles. Those are new things to me, but since we are talking to the lawyers, they know what they are. They passed the principles, then gave us a council, a first parliamentary council, and they began guiding us on the legality of things. And lo and behold, the draft was made. We had quite a number of consultations. There was a bit of a break because of COVID, but eventually it came to cabinet again. Cabinet debated it back and forth. We had about 3 cabinet meetings. Many questions came up. It was thrown back to us. We gave answers. His Excellency had his own questions, gave answers. Then finally, it went to Parliament. I'm sure Honorable Ayume will be telling you that process. And finally, it was passed, and then the President ascended to it. I'll just address the questions you just mentioned and then make the broader discussion. Is it necessary now? Oh, yes, it is. It should have come out yesterday. But having said that, it is the medical science, it is the practice, it is the service that is actually more important than the law itself. Many countries have performed organ transplant without having a law. In fact, the law is mostly for establishing a program, so to speak. But the actual surgery doesn't need a law, because I have been removing kidneys since 2004, since I became a surgeon, so almost 20 years now. So removing a kidney from one person is not a big deal. Anastomosing a vein to a vein and another to another is not a big deal. The vascular surgeons do it. Anastomosing a ureter to the bladder is not a big deal. I've been doing it since I've been a urologist, 2012. So the actual science is not rocket science. It has been happening. But to establish a good law, to take care of fraud, to make sure we protect the weak, to make sure we streamline things, who is the donor, who is the recipient, to take care of this rumor mill. He has been knocked, they have removed his organs. Can it be proved? What law is used to prove that? There is need for a law. And in the Ugandan society, where people like to tell stories and romanticize things, yes, in fact, I'm glad we have the law before we actually transplant it, because it would have been very absurd if we were defending ourselves for a very successful organ transplant with no law to back us. So I'm glad the law has come out now. So I'll talk about transplant, the science, and I leave the law issues to later if questions come up and the lawyers. Transplant is not new in medical science. 1955, first trials in the US, the first pair of twins, organ was put, worked for about an hour, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. As I speak right now, in our neighborhood, Kenya is transplanting in more than one center. Rwanda is transplanting. Tanzania is transplanting. Ethiopia is transplanting. Now, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania all began after we started this journey, and they're transplanting. So someone this morning was saying we are only ahead of South Sudan, Congo, and Burundi. I'm not sure whether that's a very exciting position to be in, but that's where we find ourselves. So to answer the question, why now? I would say it should have been yesterday. In 2014, actually, we promised, and we, just a corporate, Mulago promised a kidney transplant by that Independence Day, and we have failed to deliver since. So for us, we are 10 years behind, 9 years, 10 years behind, and we should have been transplanting. So getting an organ from a healthy, willing donor to a person whose organs have failed, that's the process of transplant. Who is a donor? I must quickly say there are two programs. The donor may either be living or they may be deceased, and we will speak to each one of them. But in both cases, those two donors must have given consent when they were alive, without being coerced. It must be written, it must be known, and since I'm dealing with the lawyers, there must be a commissioner of oaths who witnesses that consent, and there must be willingness to begin with. They must be of age, consenting age, 18 and above. In our case, we put a little tweak that if you are less than 21, so between 18 and 21, you must have a parental, notification, something like that. So you must be of consenting age, and you must be willing, you must have consented, and it must be documented. It cannot be assumed. And then you must not be selling that organ. You must not be giving that organ for monetary gain. And of course, you must not be forced. Someone paid your school fees, someone, gave you a favor, and therefore you must give them an organ. You must not be coerced. So there must be adult, consenting, willing donors giving the organ for free. Who is the recipient? I've already said someone whose organ has failed, but who is also medically going to benefit from that organ. Not everyone whose organ has failed should get an organ, because you're going to get this kidney or liver or whichever it is from a healthy person, to some degree compromise their health. Now, if you're giving it to a moribund patient, maybe because they are rich or they are very important, very sick with very many comorbidities, that's not fair. So there will be some exclusions. The slight exclusions are around 65, people above 65, they are not allowed to receive. But there are few exclusions. So you must be going to get benefit from that organ. Who is the transplant surgeon? This transplant surgeon must be trained, certified, and accredited to work in the country. So they must have a qualification known. If you're going to do kidney, you must be a urologist, or urologist for our case. You must have trained in transplant. You must be certified in those two. Then you must be accredited by the Uganda Medical Dental Practitioners Council, and the Uganda Transplant Council must also make a note of that. And you must have a license which is valid. Sorry. Okay, you want my video off? All right. So you must have a valid practicing license. Am I still being heard?
Yes, Professor, loud and clear.
All right. So you must be licensed, and this licensure is annual. Every year you must renew it. It's not permanent and pensionable. Then where can the transplant take place? Where is the transplant center? Where is the transplant unit? This is a unit which must be accredited by the authorities. The authority is being given to the Uganda Transplant Council, but they must work hand in hand with the Uganda Medical Dental Practitioners Council, which licenses hospitals. So first of all, this must be a standalone hospital, which has been doing other things, conducting deliveries, doing general surgeries, taking care of people who have had accidents, standalone, good laboratory, good imaging, and so on and so forth. And then they apply to carry out transplant. And this application must be for a specific organ, one at a time. They can have a long list, but each organ is accredited individually. So this institution must be accredited. And some of the conditions are the ones I've mentioned. But for instance, to be a transplant center, say for kidney, you must have a group of physicians, 1 or 2. You must have a dialysis center. You must be able to take care of the people whose organs have failed, the organ you're going to transplant. If it's liver, you must have a group of hepatologists. If it is heart, you must have cardiologists, and so on and so forth. If it's bone marrow, you must have hematologists, and so on and so forth. So you cannot just come out of the blue and put up one standalone center just as transplant, and you don't do any other services. It must be a standalone hospital which does those services. And that accreditation is renewed every year. Of course, you must give returns and so on and so forth. Let me speak to the process of consent. Every transplant must be authorized by the Transplant Council. Now, this sometimes has raised questions. What if? I will quickly say, in transplant, there are no emergencies. I know there are some few exceptions, but when we are making laws, we don't make laws for exceptions. The exceptions can be made, but generally speaking, there is no hurry in transplant. If it's a living donor program, your donor is up and about and is not about to collapse. Even the recipient is on life support. If that patient is about to die and can only be saved by that organ is definitely not going to save his life. There are few exceptions, but generally speaking. So the process must be slow and thorough. So if it's a living donor program, that donor must be scrutinized. If it's a cadaveric program, that potential donor must also be scrutinized, and the retrieval or the harvest of those organs must be authorized. Finally, let me talk about the living donor program, which is what we are going to start with, and the cadaveric program, which is most exciting, most intriguing, most subject to fraud. And that one we have put in this law that is going to happen 5 years after the enactment of this law, so that the population first understands. So the living donor program, this is where Asimwe has got a kidney failure, and he brings a relative to give them an organ. So we prefer that we use related donors, and related donors, we use them because any organ which is introduced into you, including blood, when you're transfused with blood, the body mounts a response to reject it. When you're given an implant, the body mounts up a resistance to rejection, to throw it out. So similarly, when you give an organ to an individual, the body mounts a response to reject that organ. So the less related you are to your donor, the more the rejection, and the shorter the life of that organ. The more related you are to your donor, the lower the rejection, the less anti-rejection medication we will give you, and therefore the longer this organ will remain in you. And we usually will give it about 15 to 20 years, but we have had patients live up to 30 years with donated organs. Now, we've got 3 rings of donors. The first degree donors include your siblings, your children, and your parents. I'm just reliably informed that in some countries, actually DNAs are carried out, are mandatory. In our law, we need to put it there. However, as Honorable Bayuma will tell you, there are regulations which come in after. If we so think that we need to emphasize the issue of DNA, that may be done. But in the law, it's not there. But there must be relatives, first degree relatives. Those are the most preferred. And with Uganda, as we start, we're going to stick to that one to give our program the best chance of success and trustworthiness and reliability going forward. The second ring of donors, who are the second degree donors, are your uncles, your aunties, and their children, your cousins with their parents. And again, preferably from your mother's side, because that is more solid, but also from the father's side. Then the third ring are the unrelated. Now, in the unrelated, we usually agree for the spouse, because the spouse is most likely giving it out of love, has not been coerced, has not been arm-twisted, well, I hope. So that's the first one, we whatever. Then in the slightly more developed countries, but more importantly, in the cadaveric program, that's where the unrelated now come in. So I'll speak to that more. So when we are advising our patients with organ failures, to find donors, we usually encourage them to get their first degree relatives. Okay, as I've described. If not, you get your second degree. And for you to bring your second degree relative, you must prove to us that there is no one among your first degree relative who is able to give you or who is willing to give you. And you go through the list. Should we find that you are sparing your first degree and you're going for your second degree, that transplant will be objected to. So I'll leave a lot of information for questions. Now let me go to the cadaveric program. The cadaveric program, of course, premises on the fact that you may not have enough relatives. When you go to the first world where they have 1 child, 2 children, no children, there are very many people who probably don't have first degree relatives. Therefore, and yet there are people with very good organs who are passing on and being buried with their organs. But you must slow down as you are saying that. If we speak the science has improved so much that unrelated organs can be transplanted. That organs from people who are brain dead can be transplanted. So we use organs from persons who are brain dead. What is brain dead? A brain dead person is a person whose brain performance, reflexes, basic functions of the brain have been knocked out. They can't talk, they can't blink, and they cannot breathe. So their brain stem functions have been knocked out. However, their heart is still functioning. So these are patients who are in the intensive care unit who are being ventilated as they are being revived. Now, at one point, and this is not new just because of transplant, at one point in medical practice, you realize that this person is irreversibly brain dead. You can keep them on life support for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but their brain death is irreversible. In the practice of medicine, it is at that point that the team in care confirms that this person is brain dead, that they now come and speak to the relatives. The patient is brain dead. He's never going to return. He's only going to be surviving on life support. You have the choice of turning off the equipment. If you turn off the equipment, they will be dead in about 10, 15 minutes. If you keep on the equipment, life can go on. I'm sure you know those stories. Now, so these are the patients from whom organs can be harvested. But let's step back. We don't go to every brain dead patient. These are patients who should have willed while they were alive that should I be brain dead, should my organs be usable, please, I will that my organs be harvested and used. This must not be a secret. And when we are recruiting them, as I'm beginning to do, we encourage them not to make this a secret. It's put on a national record, national ID, driver's license, passport, and it is known. Even your next of kin is encouraged to come and countersign and know. And we'll have some bit of meeting, some awareness, and we encourage them so that they make it known. So that by the time this person gets an accident, goes into the ICU, by the time they are declared brain dead, the relatives are already aware that this person willed their organs. So it's no longer a hassle whether they should be removed or not. Now, at the time, so consent is covered before they are dead. But if there is no consent, those organs are not touched. So when this person is declared brain dead by the team in care, then the team in care, and it must be in an ICU of an accredited transplant center, not in any other ICU. If that ICU is not accredited, then that process won't go on. There may be some behind discussion to say maybe can this person be transferred, but I'll get to that point. The team in care notifies the transplant council that we've got an individual brain dead who consented for organ donation. And that transplant council has 4 persons, 4 specialties: brain surgeon, neurosurgeon, intensivist, anesthesiologist, and neurophysician. Any 2 or any 3 of those will now go to reassess and see if this person is actually brain dead. And these 3 persons should not have any role in organ transplant. If they have, they recuse themselves. But by the time this team is built up, they will get people who are still of good sound mind, are out of practice, and can do this role. Once this team has come and done the physical examination, carried out some tests, the pupil reflexes, the gag reflex, the EEG, and confirm their brain dead, then they notify the council. Then the council, having those 2 notifications, now authorizes for the retrieval of those organs. And then that is when the transplant team comes and informs the relatives that, as you are aware, blah, 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 this person consented, so we're going to start the process of retrieving their organ. It is at that point that blood is removed from that brain dead person and matched against the blood of all the patients on the waiting list. And as I've been saying in several other fora, you've got very many organs you can donate: 2 corneas, 1 heart, 2 lungs, a liver, 2 kidneys, pancreas. Some people take gut, bone marrow, skin, and so on and so forth. So you can harvest 11 organs plus. Once you get the cross matches, then the persons who are highest on the list, and there will be criteria for choosing who gets the organ, are then moved to the operating rooms of the transplant centers where they are registered. It is when all the potential recipients have reached the theaters, it is when the transport modalities of those organs have been set. If it is an organ ambulance, if it is an organ helicopter, they are all ready, that now the person from whom organs are going to be retrieved is wheeled to the operating room, and then the retrieval starts. Usually, the organs which have got the shortest lifespan are given to the patients going to be transplanted in the transplant center of the harvesting hospital. Then the organs are distributed like that. Let me end with the most controversial thing that I was talking about some time back about postmortem. At postmortem, no organs are harvested for transplant. At postmortem, no organs are harvested for transplant. They are only removed to confirm disease and so on and so forth. And after that, they are gotten rid of. And I know there's been controversy. Oh no, we put them back. Bottom line is they are useless to both the person who has died, to their relative, unless you've got some deal with some night dancer that, yeah, I've put back a few intestines for you. If you manage to pass by, you can have some of it. But otherwise, those organs are useless. And if this person had consented, it would have been better to remove them when they were brain dead before they became cardiogenic dead. But after the heart has stopped, we are now dealing with the person who is dead, and the rest of the process continues. I would love to pause there, and I'm very happy to take more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for such an enlightening presentation. We now know how harvesting, donating, and transplanting happens medically. And now, before we take on any questions, I quickly want to allow Dr. Moses to make his presentation because he'll have to go off the call. He has another call to take. So I'm going to quickly ask Dr. Mulumba Moses to make his presentation, and then after we shall ask questions relating to Dr. Frank's presentation and then also Dr. Moses' presentation. So Dr. Mulumba, you're welcome to make your presentation now.
Thank you so much, moderator. I hope you can hear me well. And I want to thank Dr. Simwe for... Do you confirm hearing me?
Yes, we do, Doctor.
Great. I want to thank Dr. Simwe for always being as point blank as he has always been on the issues of organ transplant. I think he speaks about the science, and my role is to just speak about some of the legal things that we need to think about. First, there is no doubt that organ transplant is one of the most significant achievements in modern medicine. I think as part of human continuity, the realization that we can actually live on each other's organs is one of the very significant scientific endeavors that we've seen. But I come from Africa, where we don't just take things lightly. I think from a science point of view, it's normal to transplant organs and exchange them. But part of our society is still tied up to very cynical, very traditional thoughts around body organs and how important someone's body organ can be. And we are speaking about body organs of both the living and the dead, as the doctor has indicated. So it becomes critically important that as we think about regulation, as we think about practice, we actually think about the society in which we are working. So in many cases, we've found ourselves with relatives in last stages of their lives. And the only thing that they have left ultimately is that one part that may need to be transplanted from one to another. Even then, we have a lot of family conversations around what happens. It even becomes more complicated where you have young children involved. And I'm happy that the law has been quite mindful of some of these issues that I put out. Unfortunately, the eliticist conversation seems to be among the lawyers, the doctors, and those that reach the situation where the organ must be transplanted. Once this has not come to your door, you will not understand how deep organ donation actually means. and the complication that is involved in organ donation. And therefore, what the basic tenets would be. And I think what the law is trying to do is to raise that. And as I'll be speaking later on, one area where we have not succeeded in many of the health-related laws and technology laws is the bringing on board of communities on complicated issues like organ body transplant. So part of the challenges that we will see, part of the challenges that we will face are around localizing or normalizing the question of organ body transplant. As part of legal practice, even for lawyers, how do you move away from the usual commercial transactions to a complicated situation like we have? A few weeks ago, I came across a terrible case where a Nigerian senator and his wife and a doctor were sentenced in the UK Central Criminal Court to different years, I think 9, 8 months. And then one has up to 10 years, respectively. And they were convicted for trying to bring a young man, 21 years old, to the UK deceitfully. And the whole purpose was to actually harvest a kidney from him and have it transplanted to the daughter, the senator. I think upon reaching the UK, there are so many stories that are told. But what comes out is that during the trial, it indicated just how complicated things can be and just how uncommercial body organ transplant can actually be, no matter the kind of conversations some of our clients may have. Deceit in any way, commercialization in any way, when it comes to organ body transplant is difficult, very difficult subject. So I think we've received very good guidance from the World Health Organization over the years, right from 1987, when the World Organization under the World Health Assembly came up and condemned organ trafficking. It had become a big issue, not once, not twice. Later on in 1987, the issue came back. The resolution was passed again by the World Health Organization, drawing attention to countries for their failure to combat trafficking of humans trade that involves donations. It's if you think about it, it's next to slave trade that we actually used to have. Like the convicted Nigerian senator, they were convicted under the modern UK Slave Trade Act. So it is very uncouth as a practice once it's done outside the legal parameters that have been set. I think in 1991, we saw the first draft of the WHO guidelines for the transplant of human organs and tissue, which established some standard procedure and ethical issues that we need to think about, clearly stipulating the need to ban the sale of human organs for purposes of transplantation. I have been perturbed for many years, up until I began practicing health plan policy, why I would give blood and I'm not given money when blood is actually sold in some circumstances. I think it goes back to that principle that human organs, human tissue, and any human-related fluid that, like blood, that may be needed, cannot be placed on the market. They are rather dealt with in the understanding of donations. And therefore, part of the legal framework that we have to deal with is how do we define legal parameters of donations? What amounts to donation? When do you say that in such and such a circumstance, donation has not actually happened? And this happens to the most vulnerable, to the poorest in society, poor in terms of being destitute, but also poor in terms of economic and surviving. we have situations where we need to understand by science that you can have one of your organs removed and you survive. So people making decisions that instead of being poor, they would rather sell off some of their organs and get some money and survive. I think it's a question that the World Health Organization tried to address as early as 1991, and later on 2004, when the World Health Assembly issued one of the most significant recommendations, in which it issued arguments to states to exercise effective supervision on organ transplants and making sure that these are based on the concept of donation. And I think as lawyers, as we analyze the act that was passed, we need to understand the aspect of donation as part of legal practice and what donation would look like. Of course, there are a number of challenges, which even when we have a legislation that has been put in place, we are yet to understand and be able to deal with. I think the most instructive WHO guideline that I've seen as a practitioner again is the one of 2008, which clearly talks about organ and tissue transplantation. And it gives a lot of guidance on what should happen and makes a clear distinction or the realization that even when someone dies, their rights, you don't just wake up and take what belongs to them. I know that Dr. Simwe, in one of the calls, he has explained what actually happens when pathologists are dealing with some of the people that have lost lives. So issues of legal consent, issues of ethics on tissue as part of human continuity are important. But I think we cannot leave the question of legal competence and the questions of what donation actually means. That's very important. As such, WHO has passed very interesting things. I think the stress for the need to ensure that there is a generic, sort of genetic, legal, and emotional relationship between the living donor and the recipient is very important. And these are some of the guidelines that have guided the drafting of the law. The fact that the donation should be accepted knowingly and voluntarily. What this actually means is what a practitioner as a lawyer needs to know. What is knowingly? What is voluntarily? Because you see, knowingly could be deceptive. Voluntarily could not necessarily be voluntary. And these are the issues that we are going to face in the practice as we roll it out. The issues of minors, the evolving capacities of young people that has moved away from just saying above 18 to the realization that there are concepts like mature minors, but also the question of incapacitated adults. I have been in a meeting in Belgium, and the parent had a kid that had a terrible brain issue. And you know, the conversation around whether the kid could be given away to scientists, you know, to see and study the kid, have them lose life for purposes of advancing science was a big issue. So incapacitated young people, incapacitated adults, it's a big issue that we are going to contend with as we deal with organ donations and transplants. The fact that donation is not deceptive by any form of payment, while at the same time emphasizing compensation for reasonable costs incurred, I think is a thin line, a terrible thin line that we actually have to deal with, because the concept is that you don't sell, but you may be compensated for the costs that you've incurred when you're actually doing a donation. Where do we start? Where do we stop? It's a more practical question. And I think quite a number of cases are going to come up. And that's where we are going to be able to see ourselves making decisions. How do we deal with doctors who make the decision, a clinical decision that this person is dead, but at the same person, that doctor is involved in a decision of harvesting one of the organs of the person that has been declared dead. How do we deal with that? I think these are things that WHO has tried to provide guidance on, and we need to think about some of the things that are happening. Of course, so many things would be happening, but I think some of the things that we are seeing today are that the trade has grown locally, regionally, and internationally. In India, it's a big trade. In Uganda, you may talk about things being impossible because the infrastructure that is required is not in place. But in some countries, the cartels are sophisticated. They're dealing in human organs like they're dealing in gold. So at the moment in Uganda, it may be difficult to make a Kavanda case that we had. But in some countries, people have underground theaters that have been set up for specifically this trade. We will reach there. But how will we deal with situations like that? We have used the criminal laws as part of the approach. I still question whether criminalization is sufficient with our weaknesses here and there in the criminal law. How much are we going to be training people? How much are we going to be engaging people in some of the issues that are critical that we need to think about as part of the organ transplant? But also the other question that I think Parliament did think about very clearly is how does this legislation relate with other pieces of existing legislation or those that are proposed? Think about the assisted reproductive health law that is being proposed. There is a lot of donation that is going to be happening around that. But it's a totally different legal framework from what has actually been already proposed. Think about the people that are going to be appointed onto some of these boards that have been proposed. How do we deal with how do we assume that people are going to be ethical in a highly unethical environment? And Dr. Mungerera used to remind me of that. That it's very difficult sometimes to expect health professionals to be as cleanly ethical in a highly unethical environment in which we are working in. So I think these are going to be very practical questions from a legal point of view. And for me, I don't have answers, but more questions for us to think as we move in. I'll stop there and hand over and wait for some questions that may raise. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Mulumba, for that discussion. And just by way of recap, Dr. and Professor Asimwe took us through the medical procedure, right from harvesting, actually right from donating to harvesting and then to transplanting. He also actually affirmed that indeed Uganda is late to the scene because Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, Ethiopia are already transplanting organs. And they had also made a promise of delivering this in 2014. So he took us through the entire process, right from consent. He told us about the council. He also talked to us about the fact that there are two kinds of programs. There's the living donor program and there's the cadaveric program. And right now, Uganda is not going to be doing the cadaveric program until after 5 years from now, but it wants to start off with the living donor program. He also mentioned about the 3 degrees of donors and saying that the most effective is that of relatives who are the first degree donors. He explained the cadaveric program, saying that this only happens where the donors are brain dead. If they have been dead or if they've been moved to the mortuary, then harvesting and donating of organs is not possible. So he also discussed that in Uganda, while there have been so many stories that people go for postmortem and have their organs donated, he has confirmed that that actually is not true. We then had a discussion by Dr. Mulumba, who has now brought in the human rights perspective. He has highlighted that there are guidelines by the World Health Organization, and most recently the 2008 guidelines that give us a way forward on how organs and tissues need to be harvested and transplanted. And he also raised very important questions regarding on what amounts to a donation, who donates, and legally, how can you explain a donation? And the fact that you have people in Uganda here who may not necessarily be able to consent, while Dr. Frank Asimwe said that the living donor could be giving for example, a kidney to the father. How do you say that maybe the son has consented? What if the son didn't have any choice, wanted the father alive? How do you know that actually they have consented? So consent is actually going to be a very big issue in trying to implement this law. Also, he raised the issue of ethical considerations, because we see that under the law, we have the council that is, first of all, accrediting the banks. The council is the one that is actually okaying the procedures to happen. So how do we assume that actually this council is going to be very impartial, very ethical in the unethical country or situation that we are in right now in Uganda? So he also brought in the issue of how we want this law actually facilitate underground theaters. The fact that now it will be okay for people to carry out organ transplants. What if people come with their underground theaters, still find a way of being corrupt, because we know that Uganda has been known to be corrupt, and then they set up these theaters and have people be operated on and having their organs harvested and transplanted. So thank you so much, Dr. and Professor Frank Asimwe, and also thank you so much, Dr. Mulumba. So right now, we are going to have just a few questions. I already see that there are questions on our chat. And also there's a person with their hand up. I'll maybe take about 2 questions. So can I ask the gentleman with their hand up? That is Mr. Paul Mudiabongo. I hope I've pronounced that right. And then there's also Mr. Daniel Evans Orech. You can ask your questions in that order. Yes, Paul. You can unmute your microphone and ask your question. Okay, while we wait for Paul, can Daniel ask his question? Daniel Evans.
I think as host, you need to upgrade them. You need to do something. You need to be the one to allow them or something like that. They may not be able to. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Daniel.
Okay, I am Daniel Evans Olwoj. I also teach at Law Development Center, Lira campus. I'm a senior legal officer for Lira University. Now, I have had the discussion which the professor made, and it is quite informing. And I believe that we have learned a lot, especially from the technical perspective. But I'm deeply concerned as a lawyer, his area, but I'm deeply concerned as a lawyer, especially how do we marry the issues of our tradition and customs in relation to the law that has been passed. We have seen recently, even dead bodies are litigating over them. There's so much emotional African attachment to it. Even when there is a consent that has been granted by the donor, at that point, I also believe that there will be contestation whether that organ should be taken. How will that be dealt with at the council level? Then 2, the issue of the appointment of members of the council for organ donation. It is not clear how the security of tenure is guaranteed, how the independence is guaranteed. Because if you're dealing with a situation of organ donation, usually it arises from non-communicable diseases. And non-communicable disease normally touches the rich and not the poor. And it's very, very unlikely that there will be independence when they are discharging their role. How will that be guaranteed? Let me give an example. We have Uganda National Council for Science and Technology. They have Research and Ethics Committee, but somehow in their guideline in creating those committees, they have actually made sure that there is a mixture of so many people who actually interact with the community. Those ones who actually are more affected by this organ transplant, basically they are people with vested interests, doctors, lawyers, professionals, and so on. So they are basically people on the same yet our tradition is so entrenched that even dead bodies people fight over, even burial grounds fight over. As a lawyer, we have a long way to go in dealing with this issue. So I did comment on those two issues, and on the independence of the country, and two, how between our customs tradition the transport. And remember, the issues of our traditions and customs is also entrenched in the Constitution.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, for your question. He's asking about how to marry the culture and values of Ugandans with this medical advancement. And he's also pointing out the fact that how are we going to ensure that this council is actually independent, because the law does not talk about their security of tenure. Now let's hear from Paul.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share. And thank you, Professor, for the very wonderful discussion. My name is Paul Mliamboga. I work at a local hospital in Imbara. It is of very great interest that we share more on this because, one, we have to look at the issue of acceptability in the community, and also, as the earlier speaker had mentioned, the cultural values and norms that we have. My question is, we have challenges with cold chain management and storage of blood, storage of vaccines, storage of some of the essential items that we use in clinical practice in Uganda. I don't know which assurances we have that we are going to be in position to properly store these specimens once they are got and harvested from people, and how are we going to ensure that once they are harvested, they are stored even for a year in case if that needed. In case if someone just offers to give their organs, shall we have like a donor bank somewhere where we shall be in position to store all these organs there? I will just seeking clarification on that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul, for your questions. He's also just adding onto the acceptability.
Can we take a few? Can we answer those as we get more? Otherwise, we're going to lose them. And
yes, please. So, Doctor, please answer these two. And there are also some more questions that are in the chat that I'll be reading out for you to answer.
All right, thank you very much. Let me begin from Dr. Mlumba's some issues he raised. Conflict of interest. Does Paul please lift the mic? Okay, let's carry on. We have said that doctors who are participating in the process of transplant. For instance, doctors who is a transplant surgeon will not be part of the confirmation of brain death. So the council will have a team of specialists. And for argument's sake, these are most likely going to be retired, out of practice, so to speak. Intensivists, anesthesiologists, neurosurgeons, and neurophysicians. And let me quickly add that this is 5 years from now. And these people will be there, I can assure you. Maybe Frank may be retired by then. By the time we talk about this cadaveric program, which is the most exciting, most controversial, we have to be 5 years from now, or even slightly more. So they should be people who are not participating in kidney and in organ transplant. That will be the qualification for them to be on the list, to be called upon by the council to go and confirm brain death. Secondly, as they are licensing and accrediting a transplant unit, there will be a requirement that the persons working in the ICU, in the intensive care, do not participate in the care of transplanted patients. So the ones who are declaring this patient brain dead initially, and the ones who are coming to confirm, should have no role. Should there be any conflict of interest, it should be declared. But having said that, you know, we like romanticizing this. We as doctors, we do not have interest in one patient over the other. I know many people say, no, you're telling lies. I can assure you we don't. That this man is rich and therefore should live and the other one should die. We don't. And later on, I'm going to read for you the punitive measures. The punitive measures, if you are involved in an illegal practice, your license will be withdrawn, your practicing license will be withdrawn for 10 years. You are going to pay a fine of 2 billion and or go to prison. So how much money can someone give you to come and steal an organ? More than 2 billion. It has got to be more than 2 billion. It has got to feed you for 10 years when you have been pulled off. So this act is quite tight, that if implemented, it will be very deterrent. So just to talk about the conflict of interest, these should be persons who are not involved in the organ transplant process. Forced consent, again, the composition of the council is such that you've got investigative persons, people in the police who work with the CID, you know, who can look at the motive. This boy, this 24-year-old son, from his body language, from a few cues, has he really willingly offered this organ to his father, or is he being coerced? And should something be detected? And you know, the council doesn't have to explain themselves why they have withdrawn their consent. They say, no, we're not allowing this. Secondly, in the law and maybe in the regulations, it is not going to be the same people who are listening to all the cases. The council has about 9 or 10 or 11 or something like that. In the law, we have put that, I think it will be in the regulations, there will be only like 3 to 5 people who will be selected to listen to a particular case. And they are not going to be the constant people. So if Frank's case is going to be listened to, you will not know who of the 9 or who of the 11 are going to examine this case. Now let me go to Daniel's concerns of tradition and that kind of thing. Of course, it will take some time for us to speak. And I want to thank the Uganda Law Society and other media and other organizations which are beginning the conversation. We are just at the beginning. This law was signed in March, became public in end of May, became available June. We are here in July and we're talking about it. We're going to begin a massive public awareness campaign. Year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And of course, you know that not everyone will ever be on board. But you're going to develop such a critical mass that you're going to have people who have understood what this whole thing is all about. And willing, they say, I want my organs to be donated, put it on my passport. I am even going to talk about it. No one will dispute it. I have said and I want. And even the ones who are trying to antagonize we're going to explain to them this controversial clip that's going around, that these organs you want your patient to go and be buried with are useless unless you are conniving with a night dancer to come and eat his intestines. Otherwise, the intestines, the lung, the heart, they are useless. So if this patient of yours is brain dead and he has said, please take my organs to save another life, it's okay, let them go. Because if you refuse, and you might mount a legal challenge and you actually win it, but what are those organs going to do for you? They might save 11 lives, and of those 11 lives, there might be your father-in-law, someone who is going to deliver a daughter for your child. Then it might be your friend, it might be your teacher, it might be someone. And when you know what goes round comes round, eventually, at one time you might need an organ, and someone will give that organ. So by the time we get to this program, there will be enough public awareness to have a critical mass of people who are giving organs, and there is no dispute. Me, I'm going to donate. My wife is actually on the call. She's aware. My children who are not yet of age, no, one has already turned 18. I'm going to make her aware that if I die, brain dead, and my organs are required, please have them. I have two of my sisters on the call. They now need to know that me, I've offered my organs. Except I'm going to die in 69 years from now. The independence of the council, I think I've alluded to that the council members will not know who of the 9, which 3 are going to vet this case. So it will be very difficult to compromise them. Then Paul, you are confusing donation and storage. There are very few organs, actually they're just tissues which can be stored. It's basically cornea, skin, and I think bone marrow. I'm not sure about bone marrow, but I'm sure of skin and cornea. But the rest of the organs must be transplanted immediately after harvest. That is why I have said, by the time the organs are being retrieved from this brain dead person, all the potential recipients, for instance, if they're being retrieved in Mulago, maybe 2 of the organs are going to, maybe the heart and the lungs are going to Mulago. Maybe the kidneys are going to Zambia. Maybe another kidney is going to Mubende. Maybe the pancreas is going to Mbarara. Helicopters must be hovering over Mulago, so that as soon as the pancreas, which is going to Kabale, is available, it is put on that helicopter and is flown to Kabale and transplanted immediately. I must speak to what we refer to as ischemic time. For best outcome, you must have this organ reperfused with blood, human blood, in 30 minutes or in an hour. That's for best outcome. Anything beyond that, the organ may work, but the effectiveness will not be that long. So you must have roads cleared. Police has to be involved. When a harvest is taking place, it will be known that an organ is being harvested in Mulago because Wandega has been closed, Clock Tower has been closed, because the organ is going to Abaita Babidi or whatever. It will be known, and that's what we are looking at. We're going to be using helicopters. So it's a big deal. So storage is only for cornea and skin, but most other organs and tissues will be used immediately after they have been harvested. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I now want to also ask Dr. Mulumba if he's still on call. I think he's not. Okay, I think he's dropped off. All right. So maybe Dr. or Professor Asimwe, you can answer this question. If a recipient has the first degree donors of a recipient are not willing to donate, and yet he has second degree donors that are willing, can they go ahead and donate this organ to this recipient? Then also, when are the regulations? Someone is asking, when are the regulations to operationalize the act? When are they being drafted and coming into force? Those are some of the questions in the chat. And I don't know whether you want to answer those now before we take on. There are some 2 attendees that have their hands up.
Well, let me answer these ones quickly and we go on. Now that the law has been, the act has been signed, it is incumbent upon the Ministry of Health to operationalize it. The first two big things they need to do is to get the council in place and do the regulations. It's another huge process, but that's going to happen pretty quickly, I hope. The minister will do it. I can't say when, but that's the next thing that needs to happen after the law has been assented to. First degree, yes, if the first degree, all you have to do, in my experience where I trained from, all you have to do, and in all honesty, you see, the whole problem is if there is deceit. I come frank, I say, I have my first degree relations, my children, oh, they're all underage, they're all under 18, so they cannot donate. My siblings, oh, they've got comorbidities, and I bring medical forms. This one has hypertension, this one has this one has this, this one has this. My parents, oh, they are deceased. Okay, however, now I have my cousin, and he's willing. So you must prove. Now, there's also room, there's also provision for a member declining, and that's allowed. They must not be coerced. But I must prove that my relation X is fit but is unwilling. And they must be talked to casually. They must also not, the council must not coerce them, but at least they must hear it from them that, hey, Frank's son or Frank's sister, you actually could give a kidney. What happened? No, I am still thinking about it, and I don't think I am comfortable with it. And that should be okay. At least they know they have been contacted and they're not willing. Then they move the second degree. Similarly, you exhaust all of them, and then you can move the third degree, or depending on where you reach. But I said earlier that we try to encourage our patients to reconcile and convince their relatives. We speak to relatives that today it is your sibling, tomorrow it could be your son or your daughter or your husband who needs an organ, and their relatives. What if that person you care more about, more than your relative whom you have refused to give an organ, requires an organ, and the person who could give them an organ also refuses? So we must speak frankly and openly. So yes, if there's no one in the first degree, second degree can give you. If there's no one in the second degree, then you move to the unrelated. And the first person who makes it is the spouse. There's a little thing, maybe let me speak to you about the unrelated. And there has been a problem in the Ugandan society. Wives have been giving organs to husbands and vice versa. There is a small problem. If you have had children with that spouse, that person, especially the woman, if your wife has had your children, they have been sensitized with your DNA. They have already developed some antibodies against your cells because the fetus, the blood from the fetus, which traversed into your system, sensitized your wife against you. So yes, out of love and convenience and all that, your wife will give you an organ, but I can assure you that organ is more likely to be rejected than even a stranger's, because you have already been sensitized. So I know spousal consent is okay, that's fine, but there's that risk, and we need to know it, and we must speak the truth to you people, to ourselves. I thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. We are going to have questions. I have two attendees with their hands up. We're going to first ask Moses Matovu to say something, and then we'll have Henry Kakoza also ask his question. Moses Matovu.
Thank you, Denise. I'd like to thank the professor and Mr. Mulumba for the submissions. I also take note of the concerns raised by the other participants. I just want to make 2 or 3 quick remarks. First, I want to agree with Professor Siwe on the timing of the legislation. And I'm going to qualify that in a second. It is important for us to understand that for a law like this to be successful, we need to have a functional organ donation system. And I'm limiting this to donation because transplantation has other concerns that it raises. But we need to have a working organ donation system for this law to be effective. What does that mean? That means that our health system must have the facilities, the personnel, to be able to handle harvesting of organs, storage, and things like that. Now, I will remind you about what Professor Asima said. I do not think that we should be too worried about the ethical ins and outs of the personnel involved. I have worked with medical personnel for a long time. I don't remember finding the kind of mischief people seem to be too worried about. So I want to trust our medical professionals. Of course, they are human beings, but by and large, I believe that we should not be too worried about that. What we should be worried about is ensuring that our health system is ready to handle organ donations and transplant. And in this regard, I want to agree with Mr. Mulumba that a lot of sensitization is required. Like the prof said, I hope some consultation will be done as it was with the Act. I hope it will be done on the sensitization campaign. And this brings me to my second point. I think that the way the sensitization is done will determine the kind of reception the law gets from society. Personally, I have a bit more trust for the Ugandan people. I think that they will receive the law. I think that we, like all other humans around the world, will respond to our need for survival. Like Professor Simwe said, it sounds weird until you are the one that needs the organ. Then you understand the importance, number one. And number two, there's nothing in our customs and cultures that would support the wastage of human organs. So like he said, there's no benefit in burying someone with very, very healthy organs. And I think nothing in our cultures and customs can be quoted as the reason for encouraging that. Now, another point to note, I think, is that we need to allow the society to grow into this. Like Professor said at the beginning, even in developed countries, they are still grappling with how to deal with these things. I know, for example, that the UK has been trying to modify their law to match it with the law of Spain. I think Italy is also on the same track. So even in developed economies and health systems, they are still grappling with the issues of consent, the issues of commercialization of human organs and things like that. I can tell you for a fact that in the UK today, under their law, even when a person has consented, like the professor just told us, after they're brain dead, the opinion of that person's family still counts. So for example, if Moses agreed to give away his body to science or donate his organs, and his family decides that that will not happen, the law in the UK is that no harvesting is done. So you can see that even in developed health systems and legal systems, they're still grappling with this thing. So we need to give ourselves time. And I think we would benefit from adapting the science to our culture and finding ways of improving the law. I think some points have already been raised by the main discussants on ways in which we can improve this law and make it work for Ugandans. But on the whole, I think it is good that we now have it in place. Now we are able to see where the gaps are. And I think we should take a collective initiative, both as professionals, but also as citizens, to find ways of improving not just the law, but also the system. If we have a good organ donation system that is operating in a broken health system, it will not work. So we need to push our leaders to make the improvements that are required, even in the health system. It also ties in with the economy, because if there's no money to put in place some of these facilities, it doesn't matter how well-meaning we are, it will not happen. So I just thought I should make those remarks.
Okay, thank you, Moses. Oh, he put his hand down. I don't know if he's still interested. Okay, Mr. Henry Kakoza, please go ahead and speak. Henry Kakoza. Okay, let's have Dr. Wilberforce ask his question or make his remarks.
Thank you very much, the conveners of this webinar, and Dr. Frank and the rest of the people who have contributed and the attendees. I just want to ask them to actually make some few comments. One, at the beginning, the law is the most important thing that enables us to put up the legal frameworks and the ethical and the professional frameworks that are going to regulate this practice. So it is a very good thing in the right position, and I think we should just engage the communities and make sure that actually they embrace it. It is not geared at only a section of people who will be benefiting from this, but we intend to make it beneficial to all the poor and the rich. Because as we professionals, we get patients from all walks of life, and the need is actually there. And already we want to affirm to you that there are people who have already gotten organs to them, and we're already looking after them in this country, and actually there is need. So I just implore everybody to be a good ambassador for this organ transplant to take off, and then we see that we save lives. And economically, there is a lot of money that actually is injected in for these people to go abroad and get organs given to them, donated to them. And obviously, the donors have also been here. So I think we just need to work on the guidelines that may affect this, the standard operating procedures, and also call upon the government to improve in the infrastructure, and then resources in the different sectors, be it human resource, be it financial resources, be it infrastructure diagnostics, so that at the end of the day, both the donor and the person who has invested and even the community benefits, because these people who are going to achieve all this. And our employees that actually this is a very good beginning, and I think Uganda has always tried to be at the front, and we need everybody on board so that this becomes beneficial to the entire nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilbur. At this point, I want to welcome our third speaker. Dr. Charles Ayume has just joined the call. Currently, he's having limited internet connection because he's on the road, but we are glad that he could join in at this point. He is a medical doctor and a member of parliament representing Koboko municipality, but most importantly, he is the chairperson of the Committee on Health, and they scrutinized this bill, and now which is an act, and he is going to take us through all the political steps and also the legal steps that this bill went through for it to become law. Thank you so much, Dr. Charles, for joining our call. Please, we welcome you to speak at this point. Dr. Charles, can you hear us? Oh, I think sadly he has dropped off the call. So I think we can take more questions, but before that, I'm so glad that there are so many doctors on call. Okay, not so many, but we have quite a number of doctors on this call. So I would welcome their comments, and I saw Dr. Jonathan Mulungi on call. I want you to, if you would comment about Mulago's readiness for this medical procedure, given the fact that Mulago Hospital itself has been known for, like, it has its failings as well. Recently in Kawempe Women's Hospital, we lost 7 babies because of load shedding. We know that Mulago is understaffed. We recently had a strike by the student interns because of no pay. So the Mulago itself has its major problems and challenges, but we see that the law actually identifies it as the first transplant center. I would invite maybe Dr. Jonathan, who I saw on call, Dr. Nasimolo, to comment on this. Is Mulago ready for such a medical advancement by Professor to need so much money, to need so much manpower? Is Mulago ready?
Sorry, is that for me to answer?
No, I was asking some of the doctors on call to answer. If they can't, then you also make you also give your comments on it. But I think they've dropped off.
Okay. I can make a comment about that.
Okay.
You will never be ready until you have done. Like I said, in 2014, we had people who were offering to help us do the transplant there and then that year, but we were really not ready. The sterility of the place was appalling, and so many things, so on and so forth. But like I've said earlier on, and maybe I should stop saying that because this is a different space, there are a few things that must be in place. You cannot get everything in place. You need a transplant center dedicated, and it has got its T's and C's. If you're going to do living donor, you must have 2 theaters adjacent to each other. When you're removing the organ from here, you are literally talking to the guys who are going to transplant it, and you're not walking a long distance. You're just crossing from one room to another with an adjoining door. You're not actually not opening doors. You must have an ICU, all of which must be in the same sterile space with laminar flow airflow. That one Mulago has. So we've got a unit up to very good standards. Actually, we've walked through some of the centers, I've trained in India. I have been to Istanbul, Turkey. I've been to Mansoura in Egypt. I have visited some theaters in Kenya. We are top notch. What we have is good. So that one you can put a big tick. You must have skilled people. That one is a 3/4 tick. We have been trained, we haven't yet finished, but the team training us is going to come and start working with us. And over the next 24 months, over the next 8 or so transplant camps, they'll continuously peel off. The nursing team will peel off slowly as ours take over. Maybe anesthesia will take over. Maybe the nephrologists will take over until we reach such a time when the surgeons take over and you just have a visiting surgeon who comes and observes. So even the skill we have, you must have a law so that they're not these allegations that, oh, someone, got an accident, head injury, and by morning his kidneys had disappeared. There must be a law which can defend both the alleged suspect, victim, and suspect. It must be investigated. And once you find that this organ was harvested, then this person must be punished. So now the law we have, very punitive. It gives us the guidelines. And then you must have a budget. And I can assure you, money has been earmarked. So is Mlago ready? You will hear from us soon. You will hear from us soon. That's all I really can say. Thank you. But let me just respond to a question by my colleague, Dr. Nelson, my OB, Jambo Sebo. Something about, Nelson, your question, let me see. Yes, about compensation. Compensation of the donor. He poses a question that, okay, the doctors may get remunerated, the hospital may make some money, of course, the recipient has got a kidney. What is in it for the donor? Really, if we walk down that road, that's when illegalities will come up. What is in it for the donor? How much, what price can you put on an organ? You cannot mention any price and it will be sufficient. It must really be given for free. So that must be emphasized, that organs are donated for free. Even the cadaveric, we had a long discussion when we were framing this law about this brain dead in an ICU, and you know how expensive ICU is. You're paying 2 million per day, and then they're going to harvest the organs. So who meets the bill? I will leave it hanging. I know it's going to catch like wildfire. Should the recipient meet the bill? I can assure you that shouldn't be, because that is direct purchase. Should the government pick the bill? Maybe in the regulation that might happen. But then are you encouraging that, I cannot manage this ICU bill? You take his kidneys and we clear this bill. You must be very careful when you talk about compensation. So the only compensation that is allowed in the law, and I'll read it for you, Section 84. And I must quickly mention, Denise, I think you have got a slightly older version of this bill, of the act. You probably have the bill. This one should on top read as the Uganda Human Organ Donation and Transplant Act 2022. That's what it must read. It needs to be stamped to the Parliament of the Parliament Library, and it needs to have the signatures of the president. That is the one we are working with. Actually, yesterday I was in the Ministry of Health. Even the Ministry of Health, they don't have the authentic copy as yet. So the copies are very few. Many people are reading the version which was passed on by Parliament to the Committee of Parliament to debate. And that one has undergone a lot of metamorphosis. So many things. So when you're going to quote this, you need to be sure you're having the actual thing. I am sure I have the right thing, because it represents what we submitted. So Section 84, prohibition, that's part 11, offenses and penalties. Section 84, prohibition of commercial dealings in human material for transplant. Section 84.1, monetary or any other form of compensation for organs, tissues, or cells is prohibited, except justifiable expenses approved by the council, and it stops there. What does that mean? Someone is moved from the village to Kampala. He must cover his transport. Someone is being put up in a hotel. You must pay for that. So, but all those expenses must be subjected to the scrutiny and approval of the council. You cannot say you came from the village, came to Kampala, and we got your kidney, and because of that, I'm giving you 100 million. No, you're buying that kidney. But those expenses are captured and agreed. And we prohibited any expenses beyond transplant, because someone will say, now, say we have Lunji and Sigo Yange, I am, no, please pay for my medical examination. No, we have had donors hold recipients hostage, and vice versa, by the way. You have someone who gave you a kidney saying, I don't feel very well, it's because the kidney went. So give me some more money, give me some more money. And we are saying, if at any one time it is ever discovered that there was purchase of an organ from an individual, and Ugandans will blabbermouth too much, the recipient will go in, the donor will go in, the surgeon who did the surgery will go in, the hospital which performed the surgery will be closed. And then they can now do the legal process. But after they have been closed and they have been apprehended, and then they can go to court and plead their case. If you're exonerated, okay, well and good, you walk free. So there must be no monetary gain of any sort, but a compensation to meet expenses, food, travel, those kinds of things. Don't expect the donor to pay money for his investigation, to do a scan, to do an MRI, to do and all that kind of stuff. I thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. I actually do have the act that you're talking about, and it's stamped by Parliament, and I can see most of our participants also want a copy of the act. I will ensure that as ULS, we share this act to your emails, especially those that are part of ULS. ULS has all your emails or email addresses, and I'll ensure that we can share the act with you, or the act with you. So we are almost done with our discussion. And at this point, I want to ask our speakers to make their closing shots. Okay, there's someone who has quickly shut up their hand, and that is Godwin. Can you quickly just ask your question very quickly, because at this point, I just want to ask Dr. Mulumba and Professor Frank to make their closing shots or their parting shots before we can close the meeting. Yes, Godwin.
Thank you, moderator. I'm Canon Godem Hangzumhumza. I thank the consultant who is my doctor actually. And I thank you, ULS, for this exposition. I think we like this more. The only question I would like to ask the consultant is one. He has said that once there is transplant, the recipient, and later the recipient feels bad, the recipient should not go to complain from where the transplant was carried. Or once the donor also feels bad, there should not bad about the money, about in the body. There shouldn't be that kind of complaint. What should they do in that case if after the transplant, maybe there is the body rejects the transplanted organ, or the body reacts to the organ where the transplant was carried? What should the recipient or the donor do in that circumstance?
Thank you very much, Godi. I think either I misspoke or you didn't hear me very well. I said the donor should not go to the recipient and begin saying that I gave you my kidney, now I'm feeling bad, so you take care of me. I didn't say don't go to the hospital. Actually, the hospital now has a program for a cohort, a group of the donors. They will be looked after. Actually, donors are very precious to the nation, very precious to the transplant program, that should they ever need an organ, they go high up on the list of recipients. There is a routine program to take care of them. regular reviews, 3 monthly, 6 monthly, hotlines. They form a group, psychosocial. There are sometimes some psychological issues which come up. And this person says, this kidney has been rejected. I think you put charm in it. So there's a lot of support which takes place for both the donor and recipient, and that is part of the program. So we don't throw them under the bus or to the wind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm satisfied.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. So right now, I want to ask Dr. Moses Mulumba to make his parting shots before we can close the webinar. And after Dr. Moses, I will also ask Professor Frank to also make his parting shots. And after that, we shall have the convener close this webinar, and that is the chairperson of the health cluster, health and the law cluster, Mr. Ibrahim Sereko. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. So I want to thank every participant. I want to thank Dr. Asim for always throwing the light. I think for me, the parting shot is that the law is an expression of the government to actually regulate a very important subject. The regulatory function of the state cannot be done away with. So when something becomes paramount globally, regionally, or nationally, one of the things that the government needs to wake up to is to see how it's regulated. And we are not regulating in anticipation. We are actually seeing a regulation following a trend of things that have been happening. The number of cases that have been litigated in other jurisdictions where they led us in terms of organ transplant all give us a sign that we certainly have to make sure that the regulation is tight and the regulation is doing the right thing. We should be hopeful, and I like Dr. Simo's comments, we should be hopeful that this is where the world is heading. This is where everyone has headed. But we must also be mindful that as the world has headed there, it has led to so many challenges, so many legal problems. This being a call for lawyers, I call upon the lawyers to interest themselves in the practice of organ transplant, in the practice of making sure that all the parameters, all the things that the law has talked about, they're actually aware about them because they represent hospitals, they represent doctors, but they're also going to be having clients that walk before them with claims on a number of things that are to do with organ transplant. The trafficking of human and human organs is real. So we cannot only look at the positive side. We certainly need to be mindful of the consequences of trafficking and how sophisticated the trafficking can actually be. It would be good that we work on the regulations very, very fast. It would also be good that the institutions that have been proposed are put in place as soon as possible. I like the rephrased way in which the law has actually approached things, and we should take lessons. I think more scientific studies need to be done in the context of Uganda. We can read what everyone else has said, but let's also do the scientific studies in the context of Uganda. I'll leave it at that, and I live very hopeful that the regulation of organ transplant in Uganda has a future, and we should all embrace it as legal practitioners. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mulumba. We have seen Dr. Charles Ayume join in. I don't know if he can just quickly give us like about 3 minutes of his, he can maybe say something to us really, if he can hear us before Professor can wind it up. Dr. Charles?
Okay, thank you very much. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my way to West Nile and there were a number of pockets of no network, but I managed to stop just to listen in. So thank you very much. My apologies, but good evening to everybody. My name is Dr. Charles Ayume, Member of Parliament Kuboko, and I chair the Parliamentary Committee on Health. Well, and first and foremost, I want to congratulate everybody who participated in getting this piece of legislation to where it is today. Special thanks to Professor Simwe. I think we burnt the midnight oil with the committee, Ministry of Health, and so forth. And I must also say, much as the president took over 8 months to assent to the bill, I'm very happy that he didn't return it to Parliament. We have seen him return many bills with, correct these footnotes here. We passed it as Parliament in September, and he assented to it in June 2023. So as the chairperson of the Committee of Health, I'm a bit proud that, it was a bill that went through without coming back to Parliament. We gave it our best for a new area of health service delivery. We anticipate some challenges, especially in the issues to do with mindset change and so forth. We anticipate issues to do with organ trafficking. We put in a lot of safety nets, deterrent measures, penalties that hold both practitioners accountable, institutions accountable, and so forth. I think in one of the clauses, there was an issue on organ donation in children. Initially, the Ministry of Health had said there'll be no organ donation in children, but of course, as a committee, there was evidence that science had shown that children, for example, twins who have non-functional, in the layman's language, bone marrow, because bone marrow regenerates. We opened it up in clause B and said that there'll be no organ harvest in children. However, in the case of twins and so forth, for non-solid organs like bone marrow, and there would be that provision. And then for cadaveric, again, because it's a new area of science, we said it's in the law that we shall only have cadaveric harvesting after 5 years. Let us first slow it down, understand organ donation in living donors. And once people have understood, because even from now, you can feel the undertones. There's a lot of suspicion. People think that you can just go and pick any organ and transplant it. There are a lot of layers of quality control. Typing, HLA typing, blood group typing, and so forth. So it's not just like going to the market, pick an organ and transfer it to another. So we're going to have to do a lot of post-legislative scrutiny. We're going to have to do a lot of sensitization. And I think when the Ministry of Health is making regulations, there'll have to be opportunities also for the health practitioners to understand this novel area of health service delivery or science in Uganda. I'm very happy that ULS has chosen this as a topic, and I could see a number of legal brains are listening in. You have to understand it before you think of taking doctors to court. Please take time and understand this act. Let's not make politics out of it. I have tried to caution my health committee members, members of parliament. It's quite a complicated procedure. When we were saying that some Kabanda's kidney was stolen, and one of the politicians in this town, he got his political mileage, but if you peeled back and went back to science, it was just almost next to impossible. But he achieved what he had wanted. So there's going to be people with vested interests, but let's keep our eyes on the ball. And the ball is giving Ugandans a service. That person in Koboko who can't afford to go to India, this is the time for our healthcare services to shine and give Ugandans a good deal. I hope I have used my 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. We are so glad that you could get some minutes to speak to us. Now we invite Professor Frank to make his parting shots.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you very much, Uganda Law Society, for organizing this webinar, this discussion. And like I said at the beginning, I hope it is the first of very many. My appeal to Ugandans is one, we should be hopeful, we should be positive, We should critique. It's very okay to critique. All of you on this webinar, I'm sure you've seen a couple of blackboards and whiteboards. It is okay to critique, but not criticize for the sake of criticizing. So let's critique to make sure that this thing is operationalized. We pick out the things which need to be improved, and I'm sure, like whenever you may have said, the parliament is ready to make an amendment or incorporate something in the regulations, because that is where the operations are coming. One of my colleagues just sent me a message saying, talking about this, the justifiable costs. How do you say that these are justifiable and the cost which the patient can be spent on? That definitely will come into the regulation. So there's a lot of unpackaging that needs to happen, and the legal minds, the technical minds, the exposed minds. We were on a webinar last time with someone who is in the US. You know, you've had exposure, but use that exposure positively, not bring us down and say, this thing cannot work for Uganda. Why not? India has flown rockets to the moon. I think Nigeria or Ghana has sent satellites into space. These things can happen, but this is not just for just. There are people with organs that have failed, and there are relatives who are willing to give those organs. They don't have the money to go to India or to go to Turkey. We now have this possibility of doing it here in Mulago and in the city and in the cities which I'm assuming within the country. The skills are there. It's not rocket science. Removing a kidney, I've told you, it doesn't take me 3 hours. I'll have removed. For transplant, it may take me 6 hours, but it can be done. Anastomosing of vessels can be done. We can put our skills together, polish them up, and we have Ugandan teams do this. And our mantra in the transplant program has been, we want to have Ugandans have their organs transplanted in Uganda and by Ugandans. We know Ugandans are having their organs transplanted. It has not yet happened in Uganda. We want that to happen in Uganda. But it might happen in Uganda by expatriate teams, which is okay at the beginning. But eventually, we want to have Ugandan teams in charge of this program and actually doing the surgery. And that's going to happen. It's going to be an exciting time for us at this time for us to do. And that's a huge step towards the middle income. We blabbermouth about middle income. These are some of the things that show that you have now become of age and you're no longer doing primary health and curative, responding to road traffic accidents only, but you can give a person a new lease to life. Someone with an organ failure who is on dialysis, in maybe 5 years they are gone. You give them a kidney, you give them 20 years plus, and 20 years, I can assure you they will have done a lot for this country. So I want to thank you. I'm always available for more conversations. I promise next time you call me, I'll come with my colleagues. We've got teams, we've got physicians, we've got intensivists, we've got pathologists. I'm going to stop doing a one-man presentation, and my team is ready to come and give the expertise. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Maybe just to add, we as a Committee on Health appropriated 1.5 billion in anticipation. We just appropriated it in anticipation that the president would sign, so that when the financial year begins, Dr. Franz and his team have the resources to start kidney transplant. It was a gamble we took. We were not sure if he was going to sign it, although our hopes were high. And the budget committee was saying we aren't appropriating in anticipation. We told them he will sign the bill. Give us the 1.5, we'll give it to Mulago Hospital, so that when he signs, we don't have to wait for one full financial year to start in 2025. So I'm very happy that he signed. And then there's a 1.5 billion for Dr. Frank, Professor Frank and his team to start this financial year. I hope we can see our maiden kidney transplant start this financial year. It will be a very good Christmas present for Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charles. We are all excited and we're very, very hopeful. I've also had a relative of mine get a kidney transplant, and it's so refreshing to see him have another lease of life. So I can't wait to also see other Ugandans see this happen. So we are now going to close this webinar with our convener closing it, and that is Mr. Ibrahim Sereko. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, the Vice President of the Vice Chairperson of the Health and Law Cluster, Uganda Law Society. We thank you for moderating well this interesting panel and interesting conversation. Allow me to take this opportunity to extend our appreciation and gratitude to our panelists for today, Professor Frank Asimwe, Dr. Mulumba Moses, and Dr. Charles Sayume. We treasure you and we treasure your contributions to this very important conversation. And we call upon you to always be available to share more insights. The Uganda Law Society membership, because like you have rightly said, Professor Frank, this is the first conversation. We're going to have so many other conversations on the subject. And as the Health and Law Cluster, we'll be very glad to make our contributions on the regulations and all the other relevant legal steps that will be taken to ensure that the law is effected and operationalized and fully implemented in the country. Allow me also to thank the President of Uganda Law Society for his forecast and the Secretariat for creating spaces for dialogue on critical health issues in the country. As the members of Law Society, we cannot run away from medical legal issues, and we will create more spaces and more platforms where we'll have a conversation on these very important discussions. To all our participants, the members of Law Society and the entire public, we thank you so much for sparing time, sharing your insights, sharing your feedback. We'll treasure the feedback and we'll be glad to have further conversations on the subject. As Health and Law Cluster, we are still open to membership. Kindly join in. The membership is free. You can join the cluster and be able to have more and more conversations on medical legal issues in the country. Allow me to close this for God and my country. I hand over to the moderator. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you so much. Our webinar has now ended. God bless you.
Thank you.